Good evening, dear friends. I'm very happy to welcome you today, even though the beginning of our lecture series is virtual. But I think that the internet, distance and recording will not prevent you from enjoying the absolutely amazing monuments that were created by the outstanding Egyptian masters in the 13th century BC. But still, today's story is primarily not about monuments, but about people. Fortunately, a great number of sources have come to us since then, including temple sculptures and reliefs, royal diplomatic correspondence, and sometimes very touching and fragile evidence of relations between the great Ramses and his great wives in the many millennia of the past. So this story is primarily about a person, about the amazing woman, the famous beauties of Egypt in the middle of the second millennium BC, and about the amazing world of fragile art for which behind these magnificent monuments, images and evidence, you can sometimes quite clearly guess the characters, fates and stories of these amazing personalities. Turin, the Ugidio Museum, a famous Egyptian museum, is the second Egyptian collection after the National Egyptian Collection in Cairo. It was here that the amazing masterpieces of Egyptian art, which were exported by various consuls, collectors and sometimes adventurers from the banks of the Nile in the 19th century. The collection, which was bought by the King of Savoy in Sardinia, was replenished for a long time. And here, of course, in these amazing halls, an incredible number of exhibits is combined, and a special level of those monuments that can be seen here. Well, there are many works of art that you will not find in Egypt, but all of them, of course, come from the banks of the Nile. I would like to thank those people who once found these monuments in Egypt for the fact that most of these finds are well documented. Of course, the main monument of this wonderful hall of monumental temple sculpture, a monument that stands among other masterpieces, colossi, amazing royal portraits and images of the gods, is the famous Karnak Colossus of Ramses the Great, a monument that is not only unique but also a symbolic portrait of the collection, and a portrait that is the logo of the Egyptian Museum in Turin. This monument was found in Karnak on the territory of the eastern sanctuary of the sun in the temple of the god Amun, broken into many parts, and it is necessary to pay tribute to the consul Bernardino Druvetti, who did not spare money to reward his Egyptian workers, who literally picked up a separate part of this monument. The monument never leaves the Turin Museum, and if you look closely at the shot, you'll see these cracks on his arms, on his body. This is in fact evidence of how heavy the history of this amazing masterpiece was. Ramses depicted here a young man in all his glory. This is a coronation statue which was installed in the Karnak temple of the god Amun in such a way that Ramses, or rather his life force, met the morning sun. It has a military parade leather emblem called Capresh. Ramses the Great, Ramses II, and many other representatives of the 19th and 20th dynasties, the brilliant era of the Ramessids. They were people of military origin. This is the era of brilliant military campaigns of the Egyptian kings. Therefore, of course, in the iconography of the king of this era, the military helmet played a special role. On his forehead, of course, is Ares, a sacred snake, a symbol of the Tsar's power, a symbol of the solar force, which is transmitted from the pre-eternal deity to the ruling king. The same thing that we traditionally, following the Greeks, call the word Uri. It has the thinnest pressed cloth. And here, of course, remember that this is a diorite, but you marvel at the work and skill of the Egyptian artist, who absolutely stunningly showed both the pressed clothing and the pressed cape. and all these nodes of linen fabric under which, under the knots, under the very linen fabric, shines a magnificent royal body. In his right hand he holds the royal hippot, a symbol of the power of the Egyptian king, and in his left hand he has a cylinder, which was traditionally associated with the highest royal power in Egypt. As it often happened in the image series of the sculptures of the Egyptian kings, the pharaoh, when he ascended the throne, already quite an adult person, as it was with Ramses, he was young, but nevertheless already very successful. Usually on such images, the king is accompanied by members of his family. On the one hand, if we look at the statue in 3/4, next to his father is his heir, his eldest son, Prince Amenher-Hepeshef, who was a person who occupied a very special position in the court for many years, because it was he, as the eldest son of the king, who was to inherit the throne. I'm not going to talk so much about the political history of the heir of Ramses the Great, but I have to remind you that this is one of the longest reigns in the history of ancient Egypt, known as the 7th year of his reign. Think about it. For the ancient Egyptians, whose lifespan was not so long, the king who ruled for several generations, it was already a legend, it was an eternal living God, but he had a long reign, a long life, because judging by the remains, judging by the mummy, Ramses died at the age of 90. There were his sad sides, because he survived 12 of his own older sons, and only the 13th, his son Merneptah, already being quite an elderly man, will ascend to the throne after his father, who during his lifetime was called the blinding sun of Egypt. And of course, here on this coronation statue, on the other hand, his beloved wife takes a special place, the one who gave birth to his heir, Amenher-Hepeshef. This is Nefertari, the great wife, the royal woman, who played a very special role in the court of Ramses, the same queen whose name is the title of today's lecture and my today's story about the magnificent, brilliant, delicate, refined, incredibly beautiful ladies of the royal court of His Majesty Ramses the King. Let's take a closer look at it. Despite the fact that it is a very monumental sculpture, the image of the Queen is conveyed quite well. We all know that the traditional Egyptian canon always depended on the size of the image, and on the social status of the person depicted. So of course here, on the coronation statue of the living God, we all know that the king and the ancient Egyptians throughout the history and development of their civilization revered him as the living God, but in comparison to him, of course, the son of the heir and even the beloved wife of the king take up such a small place. That is, the height does not even reach the knee of the royal wife. Nevertheless, she has all the regalia here. She also has the finest pressed clothing, a luxurious 3-part wig. She holds a sceptre of chates in her hand in the form of an elongated flower of coastal lilies. This is the traditional main sceptre of the power of the queen, and on her head she has a crown of modius or modi. It can be called in different ways, and then no more, no less, the decoration of the star Sirius. That is, here are the high horns of a gazelle, a massive solar disk, and 2 stylized falcon feathers, a crown of modius or modii, which in this way, together with the horns of a gazelle, adds a special meaning to the image of Queen Nefertari, and thus she appears here as a star of Sepideh, a Sirius, next to the knees of Ramses himself, who is associated here with the solar disk. This is a very traditional paradigm of the Egyptian royal power, because the king himself is either the embodiment of the sun god, the little sun reigning on earth, or the living embodiment, the living emanation of the god Chor, the great golden celestial falcon, the ancestor of all Egyptian kings. The king is the sun, he is the golden celestial falcon, the queen is next to him. This is either the embodiment of the goddess Hathor, the goddess of love and royal femininity, or the embodiment of the goddess Isis, who is revered as Sepideh, as Sirius, as one of the main stars in the sky of the Egyptian sky. The story of Nefertari, the story of the female house of Ramses, is illustrated by a perfect constellation of monuments and images. Today, of course, I will show you completely different images of the queen, the genre of Ramses, and very famous, very ceremonial and little known, kept in small European and American collections. Nevertheless, let's not forget that this is the time of one of the highest upsurges in Egyptian civilization, and therefore, of course, the images of the spouses of the great king were performed in most cases, not in all, as you'll see today, but in most cases by the best royal court masters. This image of Nefertari is especially good, in my opinion. She stands next to her husband's leg. This is a fragment of one of the colossi of Ramses the Great in the Luxor church. And again, she's here in a divine form. Despite the fact that the height of the figure is not so great, she's perfect, she's good. All the necessary royal regalia are on her. Look how subtly, how gracefully the features of her amazingly beautiful body are transferred. She touches her husband's massive legs with one hand. The great wife of the king, their beloved ruler of both lands, Nefertari, beloved goddess Mut. This is Nefertari Meritin Mut in full form. This is her canonical full name. Apparently the queen had some special relationship with the cult of the goddess Mut, because she was compared to Mut. The name of the goddess Mut, the great ruler of the sky, the great patroness of the kingdom, sometimes the angry goddess who is revered in the fiefs as the wife of Amun-Ra, is constantly present in the iconography of the queen. There are even separate texts that mention her nickname. Mut is beautiful, Mut Nefert. Such a combination of the name of the goddess and the epithet could be generally individual. For example, when the names of the sons of Ramses and Nefertari are listed during military operations, it is added to them that these are the same sons of whom beautiful Mut gave birth to. Such a separate underlinement of her beauty, comparing her to one of the most important goddesses of the Egyptian pantheon, constantly appears both in the official title, as it is here, when this line ends with Blagapojalanim, Anti, Dejavit Ona, and in those texts where they could speak about the beauty of the queen, not so officially, but in a more sincere and lively tone. Moreover, we are going to touch on an amazing literary work, which will sound in Russian for the first time, but has never been translated. There is a poem about the beauty of Queen Nefertari, written in the still preserved hieroglyphic text on one of the walls of the Luxor temple. There is, as we understand it, such a paradigm of glorification of queens. Of course, every wife of every great pharaoh has achieved the best epithets. However, among these established paradigms, sometimes there are quite special epithets, special comments, which are not found in the description of other queens of the history of ancient Egypt. And of course there were a lot of them, and it is in these special titles or special poetic turns that the personal relationship of a particular author of this text is revealed. Some peculiarities of appearance, character, or skills of the great wife of the queen. You and I know, I will remind you, that in the ancient Egyptian language there is no word queen at all, only the royal wife. and it is clear that every Egyptian king had a huge woman's house. Do not confuse this woman's house with the Ataman's harem. I do not pronounce the word harem here because it is not a separate building where all the women lived. No, these are separate residences that form the totality of a woman's royal house. Therefore, every queen had her own palace, her own household, her own property. Accordingly, traditionally, above this woman's house, which by the way was headed by an absolutely full-fledged adult man who was the distributor, such an accountant of all this woman's household, in addition to him, traditionally, the royal mother and the great royal wife ruled the woman's house. Here, in the first years of the reign of Ramesses II, we face the fact that probably the power of Queen Nefertari was not as illusory and not as bright as we could imagine. Because during the first 2 decades of the reign of Ramses, there was a great royal mother in Syria, Queen Mutuia, which we will talk about in detail today. She is a very interesting person. Moreover, those who know the Egyptian history well remember that just on the eve of the emergence of the 19th dynasty, the first dynasty of the Ramesses, there was a furious uproar filled with repressions, and at the same time a stunning repression of the art of the Amarna era, the era of the religious upheaval of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Therefore, it was a difficult time, and the father of Ramses II, a wise, successful and very active king, chose 2 great royal spouses for his son before he took the throne. One of them was Nefertari, who we're talking about now, but there was also a second wife called Nefret. She will appear in our lecture today, but this is probably where the first surprising phenomenon unfolds. We know from political and economic documents that both Nefertari and Nefret were the wives of the Ramesses at the same time. But before the death of Queen Nefertari, there won't be a single sculptural image of Queen Nefret. And such subtle details actually speak of very complicated relations between women who fought for the attention of the king and for the power in the country in the first years of his reign. The upper left frame, this drawing, is very rare. It comes from the tomb of a man called Nebenenef. He was a close friend of the king's childhood, and by the time of Ramses II's ascension to the throne, and I'll remind you that his father ruled for only 17 years, and despite all his success as a politician, as a conqueror, and as the creator of amazing monuments all over the Nile Valley, he died. We don't know the cause of his death. Nevertheless, despite the fact that Ramses was a legitimate son, it happened so often that when the king ascended to the throne, he appointed his people to the key posts of the high priests of the country's greatest gods. At that time, his childhood friend Nebenenef held the post of the high priest of the Kadkor Dendera temple, and he transferred him from Dendera and made him the high priest of the god Amon in Karnak, so that the Karnak priesthood, the all-powerful, dangerous priesthood, was under the control of a man Ramses could trust. And here, in the tomb of Nebenenef, which unfortunately is very badly damaged on the western bank of the Nile, this image appears. Moreover, there is a commentary text that says that the first 2 years after the death of Seti, after the death of his father, and after his intronization, Ramses and Nefertari spend their time in the Nile. But then they return to the north because the northern provinces and cities, more open to foreign contact, more convenient for military operations, are very attractive to the king of that time. The text says that Ramses, on his way to the north, stops in Abydos. It's not a coincidence because I think everyone knows the grandiose tomb of Seti Funchin Abydos, which was completed during the reign of Ramses the Great. Moreover, a little north of this temple, Ramses builds his first sanctuary, his own tomb in Abydos, which is also famous for its stunning painted reliefs. And here, next to this temple in Abydos, just a few years ago, about 2 years ago, they found the ruins of the palace, which was a temple residence where the king stayed when he was in Abydos. And now in front of you is the window of this newly found palace. And this is the window of events. The window of events is a parade balcony in the residence of the Egyptian ruler. In this window, the king and members of his family appear in order to declare some significant will, or especially often to reward a person for his achievement and worthy service to the king. And here, just from this window of events of the palace in Abydos, appears the figure of Ramses II, a traditional gesture of the right hand, a speech, and the text, which is on the wall of the tomb next to it, tells how he is glad that Nebuchadnezzar is appointed the high priest of the god Ammon in Karnak. And a very beautiful phrase which ends with the words of Ramses, absolutely non-canonical, because apparently these are the words of the king. "Serve him well, for he is pleased with your appointment," says Ramses to his friend. And if you look at this whole scene closely, then a miniature face of the queen appears next to the king's shoulder. This is the first image of Nefertari in the history of the reign of her great husband. It is surprising, but sometimes tiny and very graceful objects testify about the attitude of great people of antiquity. In the lower part of the frame, which is now in front of you, there is a ring made of satolik and framed with gold. It is kept in the Louvre. So this is the wedding ring of Ramses and Nefertari. This does not mean that such rings were necessarily worn. There was no such tradition of the wedding ring that we modern Europeans of the 21st century have today. No, there was no such thing. But at the moment of the wedding, rings were made, which for eternity in stone demonstrated the union of two people. And here are two ovals, two cartouches, symbols of the infinite movement of the sun. They are decorated with trident feathers and solar discs, and in the left cartouche is written the throne name of Ramses the Great, Usamatras et Epenra, and the two names are addressed to each other. There is the name of the Queen Nefertari Meritin. Here is such an amazing ring of sertolic. Sertolic is a sacred stone of the Mother of God. The stone is very revered in Egypt. For the ancient Egyptians, the ring is absolutely precious, both in meaning and in material. Here is such an amazing evidence of the marriage of these two most interesting personalities. Unfortunately, we do not know whether the ring got into the collection of private collections at the beginning of the 20th century. Its origin is unknown. It is clear that it is from Egypt, but it is not clear under what circumstances it was found. But the fact that such things have been preserved from the 13th century to the new era of our times is absolutely unique. The first images of Nefertari appear on almost all the main monuments of Ramses II. Later, other wives will appear next to his huge, or on the contrary, miniature images. And here, on this very badly damaged, but once excellently made, magnificent, absolutely jewellery made statue of Ramses from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Here, in the turquoise rectangle in front of us, is the word Nefertari with a titulature in his attire. And here is one very interesting thing. Nefertari had a special passion for the crown of Shuti. The this huge crown with stylized falcon feathers, because very often, in most cases, it's depicted in it, ignoring other variations of numerous headdresses of the Egyptian queens. And it even has a special title, beautiful in the crown with 2 high feathers. And that is such, apparently, love for this headdress, very ceremonial, very bright. It is even present on the earliest monuments depicting this queen. We, of course, ask ourselves the question of who her parents are and where she came from. The fact is that even in the most ceremonial texts concerning the queen, she is named there as Ritpat Katia, the hereditary nobility. Let me remind you that all her society, the ancient Egyptians, were divided into 2 large groups. This is the Pada, this is the elite, this is the Znats, and this is the Rahid, the people of the Egyptian land. And the affiliation to the Pada is already an indicator that Nefertari came from a very important family. We do not have a single historical document where her parents would be named. And apparently this was the reason. I will go ahead. When at the beginning of the 20th century was found her plundered tomb in Saritsa Valley, we will analyse it in detail today. Among other items that did not interest the robbers was found this wonderful button for printing Laria. I specially suggest you look at the magnificently preserved Laria from Tutankhamun's tomb so that you understand what a button is for printing. 2 buttons, one on the main part of the Laria, the other on the lid. They were tied with a rope and put the royal seal. Before that, filling the Laria with those items, offerings, treasures, whatever you want, what was supposed to lie in it. And accordingly, when the Laria came from the royal house, from the royal collection, served the king, then on such buttons, which could be from faience, from gold, from wood, from anything, always depicted the royal names. And here is a button from the unsaved Laria, which was once placed in the tomb of Nefertari, in the tomb, that is a very intimate place, assuming only some mentions of close relatives. So there was found this button with the name of Tsar Aya. Aya is a very interesting person, very difficult. The roots of this family go to the previous 18th dynasty. He went through a lot in his very long life. He was the brother of Sarinatea, the wife of the brilliant pharaoh Amenhotep III. Apparently he was the father of the famous Sarina Nefertiti. He was a great regent during the reign of Tutankhamun. He finally, after the death of Tutankhamun, for a short time, becomes a deep old man, the ruler of Egypt. And the fact that in the tomb of Nefertari appears an object with his name absolutely unambiguously says that the queen had a certain close kinship with this ruler. Aya's daughter by age could not be, because it can be estimated that Ramesses II himself was born in the reign of Tsar Khorramheba. Nefertari was younger than her husband. That is, if you calculate the years of the reign, Nefertari should have been Aya's granddaughter. And if you try to find a suitable candidate for her parents among the images of the Egyptian court of this time, you perfectly understand that this is a hypothesis, but there are quite a few grounds for it. Then it would be most logical to assume that these people were the parents of Queen Nefertari. These were these people. Please note that both monuments are made of large sculptural images that were severely damaged during their lifetime. This is what the Romans called a damnation of memory, a posthumous curse. He was the son of Ea, and the text mentioned that he was the son of the Tsar of his flesh. His name was Natman. He was a very important military leader, the bearer of the right of His Majesty, a very high-ranking court title. But for some reason, Natmin, the heir, like his father of the city of Ahmed, did not take the Egyptian throne. The throne was given to another important military leader, Khorramheba. Apparently, relations between Natmin and Khorramheba were not very good, and after Natmin's death, almost all the images or texts that were associated with him were intentionally damaged. His wife was, judging by this image, one of the most brilliant beauties of Egypt of her time, that is the turn of the 14th and 13th centuries BC. She was a singer of the god Min. Her name was Enua, and here is this amazing monument, which for many years was a masterpiece of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and now unfortunately it has been moved to one of the resort cities of the country. Here you see a temple singer in a very finely pressed dress, a grandiose wig, a ribbon with water lilies on her forehead, and despite the fact that someone had disfigured her face with some heavy object, these long Mendeleevic slant eyes, eyebrows and features of lips show that, of course, this monument was once one of the most amazing for its time. It was these people who entered the very path, the very highest society of Egypt, which could quite correspond to the title of the hereditary nobility mentioned in the texts associated with the Queen Nefertari, and by the years of rule, that is, by the lifespan, Natamin and Enua come to this place of the Queen's parents, and the fact that Natamin did not become a king accordingly did not give the opportunity to his daughter, or maybe to the children, to indicate some royal origin. In the situation when the king was an old man, this did not give a royal indication of the title, and therefore, of course, with a certain degree of probability, because we do not know this to the end, it seems that Natamin and his beloved wife Enua claimed to be the parents of the Queen Nefertari. If this is the case, then the task of the king Seti, who is slanted for his son Ramses, will be very clear. The fact is that both Natamin and Enua belong to the old family of the priesthood. That is, this is an old elite that has gone through a lot of ups and downs in the era of the reform of Akhenaten, but nevertheless the family was respected and very close to the royal house. On the other hand, both Akhenaten and his direct successors, particularly Tutankhamun and his successor Ege, due to their involvement in all these affairs of religious upheaval, according to the subsequent tradition of the Egyptians, were not considered legitimate kings. And so if, I repeat, if my hypothesis is correct, and these are the parents of the Queen, then it is logical that the Queen does not mention any of her parents, because these parents were associated with that era, which in Egypt Ramses the Great tried not to remember, and even the former capital of this reform, the city of Akhetaten El Amarna, was erased from the face of the earth and re-enlightened during the reign of Ramses II. That is, on the one hand, an indicator of nobility, and everyone in the court knew whose daughter Nefertari, as you know, or whose granddaughter she was. But in the official texts, which were subject, of course, to the influence of a rigid religious ideological court paradigm, such things should not be mentioned. That's all we know about its origin. It is extremely offensive, but let's not forget that every year Egypt gives a huge amount of archaeological material. Therefore, I really hope that this lecture will get old quickly, and that as soon as possible we will learn something new about the kinship of the one whose texts are called the hereditary nobility. I will also show an amazing image. I will literally show this statue to you from all sides, because you must agree it is an unsurpassed masterpiece. I have already mentioned that apparently the first 2 decades of Nefertari's life were spent in Egypt. Nefertari, as the great wife of the Tsar, they were also under the regulation of the second, if not the first, important woman for Ramses. This is his mother, Queen Tuya, who in the life of her husband Seçis was not depicted at all. We have many mentions of her. She is the great wife of the Tsar, and there is one small head of the statue. Well, the lack of attention to the Queen is quite an unprecedented story. Moreover, to this day there are a lot of statues of Seçis I, and he depicts his father Ramses I, his mother Queen Satra, and a lot of other courtiers and relatives. But for some reason the wife was not very popular. She was of military origin. Her father Raya was the chief of the clansmen and a major commander. Her mother Ruya was a church singer, so she was a military elite. This is quite a status origin in the Egyptian Hermesidic era, because Ramses himself also came from a military, partly foreign environment. This is an amazing granodiorite statue of Karnak, despite the damaged face of the Queen. Look at the dress. At the same time, the face is quite rigid, such very voluptuous nasolabial folds. And all the charm of the thinnest wig, necklace, and plaited dress does not show, nevertheless, some perfect image of the Queen. And considering that in the era of Ramses there are a lot of great portrait images, and despite a certain stylization, the portrait still overshadows the stylized image of a universal, perfect Queen. Nevertheless, it is clear that this character, a rather difficult face, I will show a few more portraits of him today, set a certain tone for the beginning of the reign of Ramses II. Queen Tuya, in the very first year of her son's reign, was deified as a living earthly incarnation of the goddess Mut, the same Mut with whom Nefertari had such close ties. And as Mut-Tuya, she was deified during her lifetime. Her cult images have been preserved. We will see them now, despite the fact that her main function, her main title, her main role in life is the royal mother. Here, by the way, the inscription on the throne, she's also a Redpath, that is also this court lady. But here, fortunately, we know the origin. The mother often appears with Ramses in the second position, openly repressing all his wives, both great royal spouses and numerous inhabitants of the women's royal house. Here is a relief from the Museum of History in Vienna. This is Ramses, who before God, in the influence of the Nemset vessel, brings him a lamp, a burning ladon. Queen Mut-Tuya, with her gorgeous sisters standing, shaking, creating this magnificent sound with a musical instrument, creating a special atmosphere before the deity. That is, there are not so many such images of the Queen with her mothers. In this place, there should have been a great royal spouse. And looking at all this, it can be clearly assumed that it was very difficult for the Queen and the first wife of Ramses to live in the palace, headed by the deified royal mother during her lifetime. Queen Mut-Tuya gave birth not only to Ramses, moreover, few people know that Ramses was not her first child at all. This amazing relief, which is kept in the Royal Museum in Ontario, comes from a torn, literally partly, but once absolutely stunning tomb of two very important court ladies. Ramses had an older sister named Tia, who in turn had a husband named Tia, and these two, Tia and Tia, was a stunning tomb in Saqqara in the necropolis of Memphis, which flourished since the reign of Tutankhamun. The tomb was decorated with incredibly thin reliefs. Unfortunately, in the 19th century, a lot of it was simply cut out in blocks. And there is a relief from this tomb all over the world. There's very little left of the original splendour. And now look in front of you. What a luxurious Queen Muttuya is going, the great royal mother. She has a bouquet in her hands, a chandelier with ladin, and Tia follow her, her son-in-law and her eldest daughter. There is another monument from this tomb. I can't help but show you the gorgeous sister of Ramses II, especially since monuments are very rare. This is a fragment of the relief left, what is called in situ, in place. Here too is the sister of Ramses II and her husband, who received incredible court positions, of course, only thanks to his wife. Although it is clear that there were no such marriages, and he was clearly a distant relative or friend of this family. Note the suit. I can't help but stop at this. How luxurious is the courtyard we're talking about? Here too is a fragment of the relief left, what is called in situ, in place. Here too is the sister of Ramses II and her husband, who received incredible court positions, of course, only thanks to his wife. Here too is a fragment of the relief left, what is called in situ, in place. It is difficult to say at what level the master was, whether she was a beauty or not. It is difficult to say at what level the master was, whether she was a beauty or not. But if the wedding of Ramses and Nefertari is mentioned in the ring from the Louvre, then here we must turn to the Metropolitan Museum Foundation in New York. Then here we must turn to the Metropolitan Museum Foundation in New York. Because this golden bead, which interweaves under the protection of the sacred snakes, because this golden bead, which interweaves under the protection of the sacred snakes, it recalls an encyclopedia of the Empress. One day, with this encyclopedia, the happy Empress of Setnefret went up to the throne room with her husband Ramses, and went up to the throne room, the second of the first two of his wives. It is very difficult for me to assess the appearance of Nefertari, because yes, indeed, I repeat, there is no good portrait, but there is an amazing image of Nefertari, a face that was not saved. But there is an amazing image of Nefertari, a face that was not saved. This is her statue, also kept in the Brussels Museum. First of all, an amazing master sculpture. This is an absolute masterpiece. Look how the belly and the bottom of the stomach are transferred, her hips, how the pressed fabric falls on her legs. And on the side, I show this monument for a reason. On both sides, again, her beloved son Haimuas. That is apparently the statue was ordered by the Tsarevich for his mother in order to honour her. Moreover, Haimuas was not just a high priest of the god Ptah in Memphis, not only an intellectual who was later praised by the Egyptian, not only religious and historical, but also literary tradition. He was a man who remembered his roots. And little is known about this yet in the circle of non-specialists. But for many years, Japanese scientists, Japanese Egyptologists, led by the wonderful Nodzo Mukawai, excavate in Saqqara a separate tomb complex, which Haimuas and his sister Bentanat built in honour of his mother. They built it in Saqqara, not just for no reason, but there, among the most significant monuments of this necropolis, the tomb of Horemheba, the chief pharaoh after Tutankhamun and Ege. When he became a pharaoh, he abandoned this huge tomb and moved to Fiva, and a new tomb was built for him in the Valley of Kings. However, in this unfinished Belmore tomb in Saqqara, two of his wives were buried. his first wife, the court lady Anenia, and the second, the famous Mutnajemet, no less than the younger sister of Queen Nefertiti, a marriage that legitimised the rights of Horemheba to the throne. And here is a very interesting thing, because in the inscriptions of the Queen Ixit Nefret, which we are now looking at, also shows her title of hereditary nobility. But at the same time, in the burial of the Queen Mutnajemet, the bones of which were found among other items, there are educational statuettes of the progenitor of the family, which was donated there, Bentenat, the elder daughter of the Queen Nefret. And if now in this complex historical puzzle we put together, it will turn out that on the one hand, Nefertari as a representative of the old powerful nobility, and on the other hand, Ixit Nefret as a representative of the big military power of this powerful military nobility, which was often in confrontation with the nobility. And if we recall the wise Tsar of Ossetia, his wife Tuya, then the fact that even before the reign, two ladies were chosen for the future Ramses, who were representatives of the opposing layers of the high society in Egypt, it was, of course, an absolutely perfect solution for such a diplomatic marriage. And we will return to Bentenat, the elder daughter of Ramses and Ixit Nefret today. We will also see the daughters. There were a lot of daughters. Ramses was proud. He was proud as a Tsar, as a man. He had, if you count all the famous, at least somehow mentioned, with the name of the Tsar and the concubine. There will be 9 of them. These are the ones we know, not counting the random women who passed by the women's house, and more than 130 children. And we know some of the children in detail because they were born by high-ranking spouses, and someone was simply born by some Syrian or Babylonian princess who are also in the women's house. We even have a case when one of Ramses' sons, who was, let's say, 115 years old, he was certainly not threatened by the throne or wealth or a decent noble position. And on the other hand, to plough the field, being the son of Ramses the Great, is a shameful thing. And he went to Phoenicia, on the territory of modern Lebanon, to Babel. There he married the daughter of the richest local merchant, because to some extent he was the son of a pharaoh and a profitable son-in-law. And there he had an excellent merchant career. That is, do not think that all these numerous children of Ramses had a happy childhood. Only the future and some obligations were in front of him, of the royal house, only because they were royal children. Nevertheless, Ramses loved children, and in his temples and many, there are whole processions of princes and princesses. This is a fragment of the procession of the princess from Abydos. They are very graceful. They all have calls of youth, reed feathers, falcon feathers, water lilies. That's how they are all decorated here. They are priests of the temple, so each of them in his left hand holds an aegis, a ritual instrument which was needed to perform certain sacral functions in the temple of the mother goddess. They all smell the flowers of water lilies from which the mandragora fruit rises, and the names are spelled out. For example, the far right one, she has a very beautiful name. She is Renepet Nefret, a wonderful, blissful year. The middle one, her name is also visible here. She is Bakit Mut, a servant of the goddess Mut. By the way, look, Mut appears again. How important she was for the court life of this time. And so on. Behind the far right figure, there is an hieroglyphic column. There is also the name of Nefrura, the beauty of the sun. All these images, although they're almost identical, they are all specific princesses. Their names are spelled out. Sometimes we even know some of them by heart. Well, it's time to introduce you to the eldest daughters of Ramses, especially since the names have already sounded. Let's start with the eldest daughter, Bentenat. Her name is not Egyptian. I would like to remind you right away that this is a representative era of the New Kingdom. After a whole plethora of successful and very successful conquests in Egypt, especially in the north, in Memphis, in the cities of the Delta, a large number of merchants from the Middle East, that is from Syria, from Phoenicia, from Palestine, together with these trading and military contacts, come to the Egyptian territory of the gods of Syrian origin. They were very quickly assimilated, identified with the Egyptian gods and goddesses. And so, for example, the Egyptian pantheon includes the Syrian goddess of war, Anad. Therefore, Bent Anad is the daughter of the goddess Anad. That is, it is a Syrian name that was taken, in this case, in the Egyptian region, the first courtyard of the Karnak temple. We are now looking at the left frame. There behind us stands the Colossus of Thutmose III, usurped, by the way, by Ramses II. He liked to do it, sign his own and other people's statues. But the Far Colossus is very interesting, despite the damaged face. This is his lifetime image, which in turn many times usurped by subsequent kings, not without it. And here, quite unexpectedly, right in the centre of his feet, stands a very beautiful figure of the Queen. This is just Bent Anad. Moreover, here it is depicted in the form of a great priestess, goddess, and god. The fact is that early enough, when the elders, I'll run ahead a little, when the elder wives of Ramses II die, and Nefertari and Sitnefret, then at some point the elder princesses, the elder daughters, who by that time were very adult women, they begin to perform the function of the ritual spouse, that is, the high priestess. There are no details that would suggest that such a sacred marriage was consummated. We don't have it. It's a completely different time. And here it is clear that this is just an emphasized high status of the royal daughters and spouses. Bent Anad is now in front of us, another fragment of the statue. Look at the work. Wig strands, the wings of the neck. The neck, like a sacred bird, both the goddess of the mother and the mother-in-law here is transmitted by a terrible Ubonaret, which is transmitted by the power of the goddess of the mother. In her ears are earrings in the form of sun discs, and on her head, in addition to the main urea, she has a modius, a round crown of sacred snake figures, which show her connection with the goddess of the mother and her priestess power, the power of the priestess to pacify the female gods, to pacify the goddess. Of course, if such a main, the eldest and the most spectacular daughter of Set Nephrite, was Bent Anad, the eldest daughter of Nefertari is now in front of us. This is the famous Queen Merutamon, and at the beginning of the 20th century, the great father of Egyptian archaeology, the British Sir William Matthew Brynders Petrie, he finds this upper part of the statue of the Queen in the very small temple of Ramesses, which was intended for the women of the royal house. And she made such an impression on the archaeologists that even the temple, after the discovery, remember I said the temple of the White Queen, it was on this discovery that the temple was named. Unfortunately, in antiquity, the nose was damaged, but even this loss does not diminish the absolute charm of the incredibly graceful work. She has a necklace consisting of signs of beauty, that is a symbolic emphasis on physical realities. In her hand she holds the sacred necklace of the Queen, the sacred necklace of the Menet. Merutamon was known as the Great Priestess, And for a long time, this amazing monument, which is one of the most probably bright female images in the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, was considered nameless. The lower part of the statue is destroyed. In the upper part, on the pillar behind the Queen, there are her titles, but there is no name. The name was on the lower, unsaved part of the statue. Why the White Queen? Now this is my old frame from the Cairo Museum. Now, unfortunately, it was brought to the Hurghada. It is now exhibited in the Hurghada. Of course, there is no place for her there. This is a capital thing. But she probably would have emerged as one of the queens, princesses of the era of Ramses the Great, if it were not a completely unique find. I'm sorry, I'm showing you myself, not to show my own person, but so that you realise the size of the monument. This is the Colossus of the Queen Meritamon, which was installed in front of one of the entrances to the Temple of Mina in Akhmim. And let me remind you that her mother Nefertari, she is a native of Akhmim, and the fact that Nefertari is apparently the daughter of Nahtmina and Inui is also emphasised by the way her children treated Akhmim and the memory of these people. 1981, this is a huge hill. The fact that there were some ancient monuments there that had long been forgotten. A boy was walking and they were building a post office there. They had to build a foundation. He looked into the pit and saw part of the wig of this colossus. The locals wanted to fill it with concrete because everyone wanted a post office. No one needed another archaeological find that would ruin everyone's life. But the boy's older brother was an inspector, and the boy managed to get home and tell his brother that there was something incredible there. As a result, the construction was stopped. A little known in Europe Egyptian archaeologist Yahya al-Masri was called there, and he raised this incredible miracle. Generally speaking, this monument is considered to be the most beautiful, colossal image of the Egyptian queen. It is made of limestone. Its durability is explained by the fact that these hills and groundwater were very low. The groundwater damaged the colossus a little in the area of the gills. If you look closely, the gills are replaced by modern two-cylinder ones. The upper part of the colossus and the pillars are a genuine monument. Moreover, in the early photos at the end of the 80s, there's still paint on the lips. It is so purplish. Unfortunately, it is now in the open air. There are birds and traces of their activity here. It is just air. Despite the fact that there are no factories here, it is absolutely far from the tourist routes of Upper Egypt. Anyway, the state is not the same. The pigment is gone. The durability is excellent. Believe me, you can look at it later on the internet. There's a massive pillar at the back. There are two long inscriptions that glorify the Queen. Absolutely all the unique titles written here coincided with the unique titles of the White Princess that Petrina found in Ramesses. The text is very beautiful. A small fragment. The one whose forehead is perfect with urea, beloved by her Lord, supreme and priest of the forbidden, the one who shakes the sister for the mud, plays the menu for Kedkor, the singer, sweet-voiced god of Atum, Tsar's daughter, their beloved Meritamon, beautiful in the palace, the one who is next to his majesty like Sirius under the Orion. This is a fragment. It is impossible to put into words, but Sirius next to the Orion is simply very beautiful. It is interesting that Meritamon, especially because of the abundance of the text, as well as her mother Nefertari, are associated with sweet-voiced singing. Apparently she was not only very good, but she really was a musician and a high-level singer and led a church choir. In the text that I quoted, there was a moment the priest of the forbidden is the greatest priest of the main national temples. Therefore, here you can see the crown of Shuti, the stylized falcon feathers of the Accipiter Hittis, and the feathers of the truth. That is, of course, an absolutely incredible monument. And it is curious that if you look at it from the height of the street, and it stands in such an archaeological deepening, it seems that the proportions of the face and the upper body are strange. They are very massive and not very good. The fact is that long before ancient Greece, the Egyptians understood such a concept as projection of sculpture. That is, a monument in proportional proportions is made, so that standing from below, you see what I see when I make the right frame. It is incredibly beautiful. Well, and behind it once was the first pylon of the temple of god Mima in Akhmim. This is a great sorrow because all this still lies underground. Moreover, above it is a modern Muslim cemetery. Therefore, it is impossible. Unfortunately, before the revolution, the president of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, won special money to slowly move the cemetery. The process was started. After the revolution, everything stopped. But at least 2 years ago, here in Akhmim, a very important event took place. Because if Meretamon was found almost untouched, then the statue of Ramses II was found broken into many parts. Early Christianity was very active here. Therefore, here we also know that this is exactly the broken Ramses was collected. This is a frame of January of this year. Now they look like this together. And there are also sculptural fragments, architectural details. And here is such an absolutely amazing place and an amazing monument that glorifies the beauty of one of Ramses's favourite daughters. Ramses and Nefertari, not only of course daughters, there were a lot of daughters, and I'm showing some of the main ones now, but there were also a lot of sons. And here in Abydos there is a couple procession to the procession of daughters, which you have already seen, and here are the royal sons with all the regalia. They are all signed by the elders and by the duty of service together with the father and mothers in the temple. Although today we are talking about the woman of the house of Ramses, I cannot help but show the heir once again. Here is this royal son, Amenher-Hepeshef. He carries sacred sacrifices on the wall of the Abydos sanctuary. He carries ducks, which were considered the symbols of chaos to the gods, standing behind his father. Other sons are also represented in battles and in secular events many times, so we will see them again. Of course, if we are talking about the most famous and very beautiful images of Nefertari, and not only, we should take a look at Epetra Satamon, the southern place of the unification of Ammon, as in ancient times it was called the Luxor Temple. In the 14th century, before the new era, at Amenhotep III, it was built as a sanctuary of the Tsar's K, a sanctuary of the Tsar's vital force, and a sanctuary of Ammon. Already in the 13th century, before the new era, Ramses II built this wonderful epilogue, in front of which there were 2 obelisks. One still stands, the second stands at the Place de la Concorde in Paris. And even Ramses, while building the epilogue, changed the rule of the axis of the Egyptian temple, because he included a small sanctuary in the general complex, which was once built here for the first time in the 15th century by the pharaoh's wife Hatshepsut. A very beautiful first yard, which is full of Ramses colossi, and of course, next to the figures of the husband there are the tsaritsi. Here is Nefertari, again so laconic, small, with a gentle handle touching the calf of her husband's leg, but not only in sculpture. In the third year, the rule is made here, by the way, pay attention. The third year, that is, the epilogue was built in 3 years. Ramses appears during the holiday of Mina, and Nefertari always follows him. Here's her figure again, with the golden sisters behind the figure of her husband, and look at the height, taking into account the crown in the jute. It is practically the same status and height as Ramses. Everything depended on the context. The royal colossus is one story, and for example, the image on the wall is another story, and here is the status of the wife. Oh, how great, even in relation to the royal figure. 2 central colossi, behind which begins the processional colonnade of Menhotep III. Next to each of them stands Nefertari, which appeared today at the beginning of the lecture. The main sanctuary outside of Egypt for Ramses and his family members is, of course, the grandiose temples in Abu Simbel. Nubia is a restless land, the land where Ramses and his ancestors fought a lot. But it is from Nubia, from the lands of distant Africa, that the Nile flood comes. That is why here, in the lands that were, such an incorrect term, of the Egyptian colony, sanctuaries were built here, which were forced to pacify the spirit of the Nile and glorify, of course, the power of the king who conquered this land. In Abu Simbel, there were 2 sacred hills, a large hill called Moha, where a large temple was built, the facade of which was decorated with 4 20-metre colossi of Ramses the Great, and a small neighbouring temple, Ebshek, in which Ramses did the impossible. He built a temple for his Nefertari there. We will now walk along these 2 rock sanctuaries, and I would like to remind you that they became a symbol of the Nubian campaign of UNESCO in the 1960s, when all this had to be flooded by the waters of Lake Nasser after the construction of the High Aswan Dam. But they were transferred by the efforts of the international community, and I am now showing you the rarest frame on the left. This is Abu Simbel before the transfer. The Nile was literally close to the ramparts of the temple. And imagine, and we know about this not from my imagination but from the ceremonial stela of the royal son of Kush, that is the governor of Nubia named Hikanat, how in 1924 a fleet of 10 royal ships, which were accompanied by a huge fleet, arrived here, and Ramses, Nefertari, Meritamun and Bentenat opened these temples. This is the 24th year of the reign of Ramses the Great. We know that for Ramses, Abu Simbel became not only a symbol of a great triumph, but also a symbol of tragedy. During the life of the Tsar, when one of the colossi of the facade, it was, of course, perceived as a bad sign. The royal son of Kush, Hekanat, tried to restore this colossus, but he failed. Another collapsed colossus, one of the colossi inside the temple, he managed to restore. This was the first sad occasion. I'll tell you about the second sad occasion a little later. First, let's take a look. Here's the facade. Of course, it is grandiose. The Tsars look to the east, and due to the fact that when the temple was relocated, its orientation was preserved, this is a completely amazing feeling. If you come to Abu Simbel early in the morning, then in this fog, which comes from Lake Nasser, just a grey rock, grey silhouettes, statues, and when the sun rises, they suddenly become richly pink, completely full of the sun. This is an insanely beautiful birth, Abu Simbel, as if this is the thought of the ancient Egyptians from the beginning of the chaos. Above the central entrance is the figure of the god Rakarat, which is based on 2 signs, User and Mat, and all this together, User Matra, is the throne name of Ramesses II. We are not interested in this now. We are interested in two figures which are united by a green and red rectangle. This is Nefertari. She stands next to Ramses on both sides of the central passage. That is, she occupies the main place. And at the feet there are still crowded other queens, princesses. Here's the royal mother Mutuia. I will not show her. She is also present here among these members of the family of Ramses. But Nefertari, this is her main role. I will tell you honestly, in Abu Simbel, not only Egyptian but also Nubian masters worked. Not everything is perfect there, especially the reliefs. There are quite rough in some things. Everything related to Nefertari was made very skillfully for Abu Simbel. This is the main parade image of Nefertari in a large temple, the Temple of Mecha, which you see when you enter the temple. I remind you that this temple, like all ancient Egyptian architecture, was polychrome painted, that is, it was coloured. I will not spend time on this. Look on the internet, but we will still go inside the large temple because Nefertari will appear there too. Magnificent Assyrian colossi flank the central alley. There is a temple sanctuary. The temple is richly decorated, not just with scenes, some illustrations of worship, but also important events of the reign of Ramses II. First of all, of course, this is his long confrontation with the Hittite kingdom, the main episode of which in the 5th year of the king's reign was the famous battle in the Syrian city of Kadesh. It almost turned out to be a disaster because by deceiving the Egyptian king, the Hittites and their subordinates, rulers of small towns, such small princes, they practically took the king by surprise. The king, thanks to his personal valour and his closest guard, broke out. Of course, all this was attributed to the god Amun, and it was reflected not only in historical chronicles but also in literary works. In particular, the famous poem written by the singer Pentor, the poem of Pentor, she also tells about it here. Therefore, of course, this is a triumphal defeat of the enemies before the god Amun. The battle scene, the story of Kadesh, and this famous image of Ramses flying on a chariot. And if you look closely behind his headdress, you can see the crown of God which stretches the second bow. And then the poem of Pentor will say that the god Amun is more useful than 1,000 warriors, and that he will get out of trouble from the encirclement of his son Ramses. This is not the main story of our today's lecture, so I just remind you about these events. And here, already in the peaceful part of the temple, in the divine processes, next to Ramses of course, is Nefertari. Look at this scene. The extreme left figure is Nefertari, who's following Ramses, and they, the lord of the god Amun, going to meet the sanctuary, bring with them the influence of Ladan and all other necessary things. The thing is that the great wife of the Tsar could not stay away from the political processes of her time, and we probably would not know anything like this if in the territory of modern Turkey, where Katuşaş used to be, the great capital of the Hittite Empire, now it is the town of Boğazköy, they would not be in one of the temples where fragments of the Tsar's Hittite diplomatic archive were found. And in this Tsar's diplomatic archive were found amazing things, because after the wise Hittite Tsar Hattusili III proposed a peace, and Ramses concluded this peace with him. On the one hand, the era of absolute prosperity in the ancient Middle East began, and on the other hand, think only there, in the 13th century BC, the Tsar's houses were rewritten in an international language. Then it was Akkadian, and in the Boğazköy archive were found personal letters of Ramses II, his mother, the Queen Mutuyi, other courtiers, and in particular several letters written to the Queen Nefertari. They were addressed to the status of the great Queen Pudahepi, who was the main wife of the Hittite Tsar. I will read you a translation of 2 letters, all of which are kept in the collection of the Nautilus Civilization Museum in Ankara. I will read 2 letters. This is the second letter. The first one I will not illustrate. The text speaks for itself. Attention, when translated into Akkadian, the natural Egyptian names are adapted. Nefertari gets the name Naftara. Here is Naftara, the great queen of Egypt. Says Pudahepi, the great queen Hatti, my sister, I say so. With me, your sister, all is well. With my country, all is well. With you, my sister, let everything be well. And with your country too, let everything be well. Look now, I know that you, my sister, wrote to me to find out about my affairs, and you wrote to me about the affairs of the good world and brotherhood, in which finally the great king of Egypt and his brother, the great king Hatti, will give you the joy of the sun god and the thunder god. And my comment, the sun god is accordingly Egyptian, and the thunder god is Hezbollah. And may the sun god make the world good and strong in the brotherhood of the great king of Egypt and his brother, the great king Hatti, forever. And so I am in friendship and sisterhood with my sister, the great queen, today and forever. This letter is very diplomatic. This is the joy of the world, because though of course the threat of life to the king during numerous battles was serious. And now a more personal female correspondence, in my opinion, is the letter from Ankara to you. The great queen of Nefertari, the land of Egypt, says so. And I say to my sister, the great queen of the land of Hezbollah, I am your sister. Let it be well. Let your country be well. So I learned that you, my sister, wrote to me, asking about my health. You wrote to find out about my condition. You wrote for good friendship and brotherhood between your brother, the king of Egypt, the great, and may the thunder god bring peace and make brotherly friendship between the king of Egypt, the great king, and his brother, the king of Hathah, the great king, forever. Look, I sent you a gift to honour you, my sister, for the neck of your necklace of pure gold, consisting of 12 rows weighing 88 cycles of pure gold, and also coloured linen of the Maklala variety for 1 royal garment for the king. Only 12 linen garments. Check it out. This is very interesting because look, first of all, 88 cycles is the weight measurement adopted in the Middle East. This is 704 grams, so this is a serious necklace. 12 more rows, and pay attention to how Queen Nefertari describes her gift so that the necklace does not turn into a necklace made of 10 rows. And the weight could also be measured, because you understand that the Tamkars, the messengers, diplomats, spies who travelled between the two countries, spent up to a couple of months on the way from Egypt to Hattushash, to the Hittite capital. And this is an absolutely personal correspondence, sounding from the 13th century to the 19th century. I will not give you the details of Ramesses II's personal correspondence. Unfortunately, all this is not published, but in foreign literature. If you are interested, you will find everything. These are the amazing evidence of the personal relations of the two greatest powers of that time. But that's not all. I promised to tell you what the second tragedy of Ramesses II was connected with. The fact is that Nefertari died in the 26th year of Ramesses II's reign, literally barely opening Abu Simbel. We do not know what happened and how her story ended. We also do not know. But in the 26th year of Ramses's reign, her name disappears and an amazing tomb appears, which we will come to soon. Shortly before that, Queen Mutwiya died in the 22nd year, which also managed to find peace and all this joy and happiness, because the treaty was peacefully concluded in the 21st year, at least a year before the death of the mother queen. As a result, when the elder wives die, on the one hand, their daughters Marutaman and Bentinat become ritual spouses of priests, and Ramses does an absolutely incredible thing. In the 34th year of his reign, as a sign of good friendship, the first Hittite princess who becomes his wife comes to the court of the Egyptian king. In Abu Simbel, we are now interested in the frame on the left. Next to the large temple, there is a large wedding stela of Ramses II. It tells in detail how the king Hatti offered him his daughter, and that Ramses thought it would be good, and he sent a huge cart to meet her. She brought with her several hundred noble Hittite ladies who became part of her court circle. There is a very funny thing when they met, and when she came to his heart. This is a very personal phrase. I will help you understand. In the green square rectangles, I'm bad at geometry. This is a rectangle in which Ramses sits with the gods. Of course, the Egyptians depicted him as a divine person. In the turquoise rectangle, a thin female figure. This is the daughter of the Hittite king. And finally, in the red rectangle, the Hittite king himself. We do not know her real name, because in Egypt it was customary to give new Egyptian names to those foreign princesses who became part of the royal women's house. She received in Egypt the name Madonnafrura, shining beauty, choir of the sun. There is one very interesting thing here. She became the first foreign wife of Ramses. We know that her sister was also given to him later. He had 2 Hittite wives, and judging by some monuments, there's an image in Chicago where the Hittite king sits with Ramses. There is such an assumption, not fully justified, that maybe the world was such that even the Hittite king came to the wedding and visited Egypt. In any case, Madonnafrura became the only foreign princess. I remind you that Ramses was married to a Syrian princess and a princess of Babylon, so she was the only wife who was worthy of being depicted next to the royal colossus. Quartzite colossus, its lower part, is now in the city of Tanis, but it was originally built for the first Ramses, for the brilliant capital of Ramses the Great, which he built on his father's foot in the eastern part of the delta. I will now show you a large female figure made very decently. Alas, it is damaged, but let's say thanks to history that it remained from the 13th century until the new era. And there it is written that the great wife of the king, the ruler of both lands, Madonnafrura, and the lower part below the cartouche of the queen, is the daughter of the first from the country of Hattia. Not the king of Hattia, but the first. And this first is, a court prince. That is, it is clear, considering the Egyptian royal ideology, that is, in personal letters they wrote, my brother, my sister, and for the Egyptians it was shown. The side table showed the absolute difference in status between the pharaoh and the ruler of some Hittite kingdom. Although from a political and economic point of view, they were equal in this moment of the kingdom, and Hattia for a long time was the main Egyptian rival. Naturally, the foreign queen could not become the supreme priestess. The Egyptian religion is absolutely nationally oriented, and it is from this moment that the bright role of the daughters of Bentinat and Marutaman as great priests, as conditional kings who replaced their mothers in the temples of Egypt. And apparently, in order not to have unnecessary conversations, even here, On this statue, on the one hand, the foreign princess is very ceremonious, and on the other hand, Maritimon is already standing between the king's feet, also like the great wife of the king. That is, there is such a balance between the foreign queen and the Egyptian queen, who's present here at this amazing monument of Ramesses II, showing at least a little, revealing the story and his Egyptian wife. Next, Mater Nefrura is practically not present in the written sources. Apparently she just lived in his residence in Ramesses II, but we know several documents that one of the favourite daughters, who, by the way, also apparently by the mother, with such a reference to her name, was called Nefrura. Do you remember the Abydos process? I showed you that there is the Princess Nefrura. This Princess Nefrura is the daughter of Ramses and Mater Nefrura, the Egyptian princess, who accordingly became such a high-ranking court lady. We return to Abu Simbel. On the left is a large panorama of the Mehahel, the main temple. The turquoise arrow indicates Ibshek. By the way, in ancient times, this mountain was revered as a place of worship of the local goddess Hathor. That is, Hathor meant a larger shrine than the Great Hill, and it is there that Ramses does an absolutely incredible thing. This is the temple of Ibshek, which is dedicated to Hathor, the ruler of Ibshek and the queen of Nefertari. And judging by the titles that are written next to the names of Nefertari in the temple, she is revered here as a living deified queen. She acts here in the image of Sirius the star. It is absolutely incredible that of the 6 statues on the facade, 2 statues are Nefertari herself, who is even taller than Ramses himself. Unprecedented perhaps, such a deification in Egypt of the New Kingdom was achieved only by the famous Queen Thea, the wife of Amenhotep III. And also in Nubia in the 14th century BC, Amenhotep III built a temple for himself in Solibi, where he was deified, and next to it was the temple of Sidi Inga, where Thea was deified as the angry form of the mother goddess. This was the precedent that was partly copied during Ramses II. He copied Amenhotep III in his colossality, luxury and splendour, and this temple was built here. I will show you an old frame so that you understand how it was originally. The Nile came literally to the threshold of the sanctuary. And here is such a wonderful ship, a ship, if my memory serves me correctly, I think this is the 11th year. And here you see how the architects initially conceived this panorama of the sanctuary, who were literally ready to take the royal shield, descending from the ship and sailing along the Nile. Let's look at Ibjek. Fortunately, the Queen's Temple has been preserved very well, and it is here with the most incredible words that Ramses worships Nefertari. And it is here next to her figure. Look, let's read from the left. The extreme figure on the left is Ramses. Then stands Nefertari with an indescribable face. And there, between them, is a part of the facade with the inscription. It is on this part of the facade that it's written, Tarati, the rising sun. This amazing title of Nefertari, no other Egyptian queen had such a title. This is clearly some kind of author's thing of Ramses the Great in relation to his beloved wife. Similarly, the symmetrical composition on the right, in the centre of Nefertari, there the face has been preserved, fortunately, and we can look at it larger. These are the figures made very interestingly, and she is here in a parade dress with her sister as a priestess. Children stand next to them. They all have children standing up to the height of the knee. And again, this set of a star in the form of the horns of a gazelle, falcons and a sun disk, It is present everywhere here next to Nefertari. Let's look inside. Of course, the temples were moved. On the other hand, we praise all the gods that it happened, because losing such beauty under the waters of Lake Nasser would be, of course, unforgivable for humanity. Here in this temple, there is a very special iconographic program which very carefully speaks on the one hand about Nefertari as an admirer of the goddess, on the other hand about Nefertari as a worthy wife of her husband, and on the third about Nefertari as a revered person. Let's take a look. First of all, these pillars of the main hall are decorated with such wonderful pilasters with masks of the goddess Kador. Kador, the ruler of Ibshek, or Kador Ibshekskaya, was venerated here, as I said, from ancient times as a special form of the goddess of love, and also a keeping place of a meal. Therefore, there will be a lot. Despite the time and all the historical Pripyat, there are many elements of painting that have remained here. Therefore, look at this Kador with a colourful wig, absolutely wonderful, with characteristic curls. And then on both sides, next to the sister, that is a ritual braid embodied in stone. On the one hand, the titles of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt and the ruler of both lands begin. That is, the titulature of Ramesses II begins there. And on the other hand, the great wife of the king, their beloved, that is here in parallel everywhere next to Ramses, Nefertari is present. Of the two faces of the goddesses which are venerated here by the queen, here, of course, on the one hand, Kador stands out as a symbol of youth, femininity, love, the mystery of life. On the other hand, everywhere, of course, the goddess Mut is present, her beloved goddess, the great Fivan goddess. There is no way without her here. Therefore, look at what a luxurious Nefertari with sisters and bouquets venerates Kador and Pshekskaya. You understand that the true place of this picture is shown by the turquoise rectangle. If we look at the other wall, then here too a huge decorative program and a turquoise rectangle show Nefertari in front of the goddess Mut. That is, Mut and Kador in the era of Ramses the Great are perceived as two faces of the great mother goddess, as the goddess of the royal Zeva and as the goddess of the royal mother. And accordingly, both faces of the goddess Nefertari are venerated here. Of course, she is present here next to her husband, and the husband here performs triumphant and victorious actions. He kills all the northerners, he kills all the southerners. That is, he is such a traditional Egyptian king who conquers everyone. Nefertari stands next to him every time. Here on the back wall, you see Ramses raises his finger, and next to him, in a blessing gesture, stands a completely luxurious figure of Nefertari, just below the height with which the king himself is depicted. Here is another scene, supplementing here completely. Here, in the crown of Lower Egypt, the king kills a northerner, a lioness, and again Nefertari with a blessing gesture next to the standards of the royal family, the royal life force. She's present here next to her husband. It is curious that in this temple she is allowed to be present in front of the goddesses alone. She is not such a significant figure here that Ramses' intervention is not required here. Here she is with two sisters, and pay attention how beautifully it is shown. It is not a static form, but as if she is shaking them. They are just connected to each other. And here's another very important goddess. This is Hathor, the ruler of Tavardania. This is Hathor of Denderskoye, the main form of the goddess Hathor. She is the ruler of the sky, the lady of all gods, who, in accordance with the Egyptian canon, promises to give the queen both life and indomitability, power and all kinds of health, and this power over both lands. All this is recorded here. There is a unique scene in the temple. This is the main scene of the annihilation of Nefertari. She takes the central place here. She is incredibly good here. And on both sides of her, Hathor and Pshikskaya stand on the left, on the right, the goddess Isidda, the great mother of God, and they put the crown of Sirius on her. This is the annihilation of the queen by putting on her the great crown of the star. There's nothing like this in any other Egyptian queen. Here the Queen Nefertari even bypassed the Queen Thea, and such a coronation relief, and the queen is depicted of the same height and status as the goddesses themselves. The Egyptian artists never did again. But this is not all. We all understand that for the queen herself, Hathor is the main thing in this temple as the original ruler of this place. And here there are amazing scenes. In particular, this is the first time such a plot with the connection of Hathor and the overgrowth of the green reed appears for many, many centuries before that, still in the era of the Great Pyramids. This is one of the variations of the ritual of Seshuaj, that is the overgrowth of the green reed. When Hathor swims here in the form of a cow on a golden boat, she overgrows the great reeds. This noise of reeds is a symbol of life that opposes silence, that is the sign of death. And plus, it opens the passages of another world, takes care of all the living, takes care of immortality. And here the Queen Nefertari, with the sacrifice and flowers, worships Hathor Ipshek in this very ancient image of the great cow, mother of feeding and mother of immortality. The cow actually occupies the main place in the sanctuary of this temple. This is the sanctuary of the temple of Ipshek. First, I ask you to look at this image. Then I'll show you something that will help you understand what it is. Let's look at the central back wall. There is a niche. The niche is framed with two columns with the masks of the goddess Hathor. On the left is Ramesses, who worships the goddess, because the axis was arranged so that the ray of the sun fell inside this temple. From the niche comes a very badly damaged statue of a cow, under the chin of which stands the figure of the king. Fortunately, I have a great opportunity to let you understand what was here without resorting to any three-dimensional reconstruction. In one of the tombs of Saqqari, according to Ramses the Great, a very high-ranking official, Nachirumas, apparently, having seen this image, made himself the same Hathor, and this Hathor remained absolutely magnificent. Look now to the left. This is approximately what came out of the niche of the small temple of Babu Simbel. And this is a masterpiece of the 13th century BC, which has preserved the painting of colour. Hathor connects worlds. She opens passages into the world of gods, into the world of ancestors. She struggles with all kinds of death, and celebrating and healing, she offers the living immortality. Therefore, here is the half of the goddess in another world, and this half is also the king under her protection in this. This is exactly how the central group of the sacred temple of Babu Simbel looked. Pay attention, there are exactly the same horns of a cow in the Nisha ears. This is a perfect example. Thank you, Nachiromas, for doing this, because I don't want to attract any creativity of modern artists. It will still be bad, but there is another very important thing that is often forgotten by those who visit the small temple of Babu Simbel. Inside the sanctuary, now this zone is highlighted with a green frame. There is Ramses in the world of gods, and Nefertari sits behind him. She's absolutely introduced into the dream of the gods, a woman. And of course, for many millennia of the history of ancient Egypt, this is one of the very few cases when the beloved great wife of the Tsar achieved such admiration in her life that she was even built a whole temple where she, through the coronation, through the transformation of the entity, entered the world of gods. In the intronization inscription of the temple, it is written as follows: Ramesses, he erected the temple carved in the mountain forever, of course for the great wife of the Tsar, Nefertari, beloved Mut in Nubia, in eternity and infinity, for Nefertari who pleased the gods, the one for whom the sun rises. I would like to show some other monuments related to the Queen Nefertari, because despite the fact that she's very famous, in most cases, when they speak, they will show some images from her tomb. I would like non-tomb things. Here's another statuette. It is from Heliopolis. This is a statue of the adored Nefertari. It is kept in the Berlin Museum. For a long time there was a dispute about who the Tsar was, but fortunately among the monuments found in Heliopolis, a base was identified that fits her broken feet. And there too it is very interesting. There are not only incredible titles of Nefertari, all these proverbs written on the space, there it is also Mut, Nefret, Mut, beautiful. That is, it is mentioned both through the official title and through its nickname. The story of Usimbel ended. You know how. This is a rather rare frame, how the temple of the Queen Nefertari is moved to a higher place. This whole story dates back to the 1960s, which still allowed to do so that we and our descendants still saw the miracle to which his wife was pleased, Ramses. Several different statues of Nefertari. I immediately warn of different artistic level. Not everything was done by the great Tsarist master. Sometimes it was done by a very provincial person. This is an average quality statue which for many years was kept in the collection of the American Fund of the Harrer family. It was sold in the early 2000s for $230,000 and left the private collection. Since then, it wanders around different other collections. Despite the fact that the foundation is broken, this standard with the mask of the goddess Mut, which the queen holds in her hands, is covered with her title, and it is clear that we are talking about Nefertari. Here is her smiling, round-shaped face. Apparently it is also quite portrait. A nice monument. It is rarely mentioned. An unsuccessful monument, which is kept in the British Museum. I think if the Queen had seen such an image, the sculpture would have been bad. Nevertheless, according to the inscription on the pillar, it is Nefertari. Unfortunately, he still in the 19th century got into the British Museum. It is not clear from where, but this is not a capital work. This is some kind of a deaf province. I believe that this monument defiled the great beauty of antiquity, but I can't show it to you because it is signed. So I want to include it in the lecture. An amazing monument, very little known, from the Cairo Museum. Judging by the titles, we are still talking about a Nefertari, despite the fact that the lower part of the statue, where the name itself was broken, here is the great wife of the Tsar, beloved to them, and the son of the Tsar from his flesh. Such scenes usually depicted the queen with her son heir. In style, this is purely early Roman times, and most likely this is what all specialists who deal with the era of Ramses the Great in front of us is a sculptural group depicting Nefertari, her eldest son, Amenher-Hepeshef, who's also here carrying the apocalypse, a symbol of his very high court position. Appreciate again how the body of the queen is made. Amazing work. Although this is a steatite, That is, there is a fairly soft stone that allows the sculptor to apply his efforts quite widely. And it is curious that the face was made of another material which was inserted into this monument. Alas, in Karnak, where this statue was found, unfortunately, no other fragments were found. Maybe someday we will see how the face was made, because it was apparently good. A very beautiful monument, although it is headless. This is the statue of Queen Nefertari, about 30 centimeters. There are also incredible words on the pillar. And apparently after Nefertari's death, this statue was established by her son, Merietum. This is one of her eldest sons, who's also here as the Apocalypse, represented by the Queen. Pay attention to the modelling of the body. This is an absolutely amazing work in the Brussels Museum. Here is such an unexpected Nefertari on the wreckage of his husband's statue. It was a small statue of the future Ramesses II from the red Jacma. Absolutely incredible monument in colour and hardness, in the complexity of processing. And here, next to the king's feet, here is such a carved figure. Pay attention to how she squeezes the flower of papyrus in her left hand. Very beautiful. And her name, Nefertari Meritum. It is written here in full form, and probably the saddest monument associated with Nefertari, which is known by a few, even from specialists. On the territory of the temple of the goddess Hathor in Dendera, in the corner, in such a zone, were various archaeological finds that were made here in different years, which it seems the inspectors do not cause much interest. There is such a wreck. It was the well of the Queen Nefertari, from a fantastic marbleized pink star, more than 2 meters high, this statue occupied. And behind, this is the same monument. Here, such an inscription. And you know, there is such a ridicule, terrible ridicule of time. Because on the one hand, there is such an almost unrecognizable figure of the Queen. And on the other hand, the following is written. She, with a beautiful face, pleases the heart when she is the wife of God, the great wife of the Tsar, the lady of the crown and high feathers, the ruler of both lands, Nefertari's beloved Mut, ringing sisters in Karnak, pacifying the choir with her words, the great wife of the Tsar, whom he loves. This is part of the inscription, the main one, which is on these 2 pillars of hieroglyphic text here. And here is such a beautiful dictionary, and once amazing. Believe me, the work is fantastic. Maybe it's not so visible on the monument, on the frame here. She has a belt on her belly from the front, and this belt is all pressed. And every hide of the belt, every fold, it is cut separately. It was a great masterpiece of ancient art. Alas, today it still lies in the temple complex in Dendera, where it was found. Together with the Queen's death, began the final work on the preparation of the burial here in this place. In antiquity, this valley in the west of the Ephora was called Tasset Nefru instead of Beauty. Today it is called the Valley of the Queen, or in Arabic, Al-Wadi Al-Malikat. At the base of this valley is a very ancient and sacred place. This is the tomb of the Mother Goddess, which you now see in the centre. It was perceived as a clone of the great goddess. The rocky forms visually resemble hippopotamus and a fragment of a cow's face. There is graffiti from the 4th millennium BC, and there, as a result, a grotto with a pool was made in the centre. And here, when occasionally, once every 10 to 20 years, in ancient times, there was a serious downpour, the great wife of God, the great wife of Karnak, came here and collected this water. The pool was painted red from the inside, and this red water was the blessed water of blood flowing from the Mother Goddess as a sign that new world was born. It was this super sacred place that caused the construction of tombs for royal women and royal children on the other hand. Now, the place was very bad because there are very porous rocks and a very bad limestone. It was difficult to work here. And of course, from the very beginning, it was very difficult to make tombs. During the 18th dynasty in the 14th century BC, even a little earlier, there were tombs of royal daughters of high-ranking nobles. The first queen who was buried in Tacit and Neferu was Queen Satra, the wife of Ramesses II and the mother of Seti I. That is the grandmother of Ramses the Great. There are a lot of tombs in Bada. Now you see aerial photography. And of course, Nefertari, with her famous tomb of 66, became an absolute legend of this necropolis as Italian specialists who found it in 1904, Sistine Chapel of Ancient Egypt, will be written by the outstanding Italian archaeologist Ernesto Schiaparelli, who was fortunate enough to find it. Now in front of you is the main part of the grotto. The massif on the right was understood as a hippopotamus, and on the massif on the left is a fragment of a cow's head with an ear, and all this is a sacred space. Here, by the way, is one of the graffiti that is here with a sacred cow, and it was a very sacred place. There are a lot of educational things, votive gifts, many other things. This is what the Zaretz Valley looks like from above. Most of the tombs are closed. I'll show you a few shots now. The Zaretz Valley had a very tragic story because unlike the Zaretz Valley where you don't go for a long time, everything is close here. Unfortunately, the early Christian monks, they made their cells here. For some reason they had to make cells here. On the other hand, they burned, laid the walls with logs, set these logs on fire, and then destroyed the image of the Tsars and Tsarits. The tomb of Mutui, the mother of Ramses II, is in a terrible state. The tombs of Ramses the Great. As a result, the fact that Nefertari did not suffer from them is just great happiness, because they just didn't find it. It was already buried. Therefore, the tomb was not vandalized, not desecrated. There are different types of tombs here. Nefertari's tomb in the red zone is the most massive two-level tomb, the most ceremonial in this necropolis. Initially, there were many scientists here. Here, on the left, Giovanni Belzoni, a famous adventurer and researcher of Egypt. On the right, Jean-Francois Champollion himself, who, together with his Italian assistant Ippolito Rossellini, made the Franco-Tuscan famous expedition. They were here in the Zaretz Valley. I will not mention much in this expedition the collection of the Louvre and the Archaeological Museum in Florence, but together with Champollion and the early scientists, there is a great French painter, Prix de Vienne, who manages to paint and even partially reconstruct the image. You will not see it now, just a burnt image, just a fragment of the preserved polychromy. Prix de Vienne restored the colour. This is not Betawi. This is one of the eldest daughters of Ramses II. Look at this amazing headdress. Imagine that all these places of repentance that now look like holes in the desert, they were inside the incredible last palaces of royal women, which unfortunately, for some reason, were needed by the monks who destroyed all this incredible beauty. The great Italian is Schiaparelli. He worked a lot in the fiefdoms on the western coast. He worked very carefully, very dignifiedly, and all the finds that the Egyptian government, therefore Schiaparelli, being the director of the Turin Museum, brings them to Italy. Therefore, most of the finds related to the valley of the Zaretz are kept in Turin. already in the second half of the 20th century, are traditionally engaged in excavations in the valley of the Sarets. I will tell you about everything gradually. And in this state, Schiaparelli found a tomb. This is a famous frame from his archive. This is the tomb of the Tsar's son, Hamuas. Do not confuse Hamuas with the son of Ramesses II. This is a much later prince, from the 12th century to the new era. The tomb itself was still open in antiquity, and here is such an incredible number of morgues, burial chambers, later coffins, sarcophagi, details of the burial inventory, mummies. All this was filled like this. Remember this now, when you come to this tomb on a tourist ticket, you will see there are clean wooden floors. All these sarcophagi things, items of the burial inventory, were restored, also transported to Turin. Here is a classic story. This is the tomb of Nefertari, in which there was once a portrait of a princess with papyruses on her head. A large flying image of the goddess was remade, knocked down from above such a terrible red cross. Everything was destroyed. The sarcophagi were knocked down, and everything was burned. No one could do it themselves. Now, to be honest, I saw the closed tomb of the Valley of the Kings, but there your hands begin to shake, because you understand what has died and what could have died when you're in the tomb of Nefertari. Here's a fragment with the image of Nefertari, nothing worse than Nefertari, but look how someone was sitting and trying to beat her hands with an axe, beating her face. Miraculously, her name, crown and fragments of decoration remained. This is the tomb of Ventanat. Remember the princess? Everything is burned black there. But fortunately, after they burned the painting, they did not beat the image with an axe or something. They just stayed black on the walls. And as a result, when the great Frenchwoman Christiane de Roche-Nablecourt, she used cellulose to preserve the ashes on the walls. Tourists are not allowed there. Everything is incredibly fragile. But here, in this photo, the lower Ventanat and one of her daughters are in a divine process. In this state, the tomb of Ramesses II's eldest beloved daughter, Meritamon, is not better. The upper picture is already preserved by the French. The wall is almost completely destroyed. The lower picture is an illustration of the European 19th century, when there was still something. Here, in such a triumphant gesture, the daughter of Ramses and Nefertari brings gifts to Osiris, their son-in-law, the great ruler of the West. Looking at this, it is not very common to talk about it. Imagine how much we have lost. And when we look at Nefertari now, I want you to understand that this is a masterpiece, but it is not an exclusive masterpiece, but a masterpiece of one of a series of similar monuments which were once created by the masters of Ramses the Great for his woman. There is no mystery in the Valley of the Queen. There is an amazing tomb number 40 where the decoration is well preserved. It was not turned into a cell, but in style it is either the end of the reign of Setius Fan or the beginning of the reign of Ramses II. But all the names of the Queen, all the cards are left empty. We do not know for whom this tomb was intended. Although now it is closed for visitors, this is an exclusive shooting. Look at the red mountain of the Great West, where the symbol of the West, the bread, the ribbon, the feather and the sacred falcon appear. Well, this is the nameless Queen herself, worshipping the great heavenly cow. Pay attention to the figure of the Queen, the yellow empty oval, that is, the cards were not made. The work is titanic. It is no worse than the tomb of Nefertari, but it is still unclear for whom from the wives of Ramses, apparently fallen into the abyss. This tomb was originally intended. Sometimes in the valley there were random finds. In the left frame you can see Christiane de Roche-Noblecourt and her disciple and successor Christiane of Lublin, who now works in the Valley of the Queens. They study the later mummies of the tomb of Queen Tana Jimmy. In the 1980s, clearing the almost completely destroyed tomb of Mutui, the mother of Ramesses II, de Roche-Noblecourt found the lid of her canopy from the alabaster, which once was in the style of the rule, more even of Cicero the Farfman than Ramesses II, all encrusted with blue glass. Imagine that there were encrusted eyes. The work is amazing. You can see this monument. It is on display in the collection of the Museum of Egyptian Art in Luxor. Of course, Nefertari, you now see in the right part such a white vault, which was built over the tomb of the Italians. It became an absolute legend of necropolis. From the notes of Schiaparelli, 1904. A few days later, with a large squad of workers, I began systematic study of this place. 2 days later, we discovered the first rough steps of a steep staircase, and after several steps, we found the entrance to the tomb, behind which there was a descending corridor with roughly processed walls. At a distance of about 15 metres, it turned left and opened into a rather large hall. With the enthusiasm that envelops the workers when they feel the imminent finding of the tomb, a bunch of garbage that covered the steps were soon taken out. A beautiful staircase appeared in the light, with stairs cut in the rock of a comfortable height, which led down the space between two carefully processed walls covered with plaster. The staircase, 165 metres wide, with a characteristic smooth ramp for the descent of the stone sarcophagus in the middle, led to a depth of more than 8 metres to the wide door. On the porch, on both sides of the image of the rising sun, with two sacred eyes and figures worshipping Isis and Neptune on the sides of it, we read the name of the famous wife of Ramesses II. The name of the queen was also mentioned in the inscriptions, which, in the technique of painted relief, were made on both jambs of the door. In addition to the thoroughness of the work and the accuracy of the research, Schiaparelli and his wonderful assistant Francesco Ballerini left behind more than 130 glass plates from 1304. And when later, alas, starting in the 1920s, the tomb of Nefertari began to collapse terribly, and before it was preserved in our time, it was these glass plates that gave a lot to scientists to understand the original state of the tomb and to understand some lost fragments of the text. Finally, in the early 1920s, on the eve of the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, an outstanding photographer and art historian, Gary Burton, a personal photographer of the Metropolitan Museum, who worked with Carter, shot a lot of the best tombs of the Finnish necropolis. Among them was Nefertari, so part of this amazing archive was also preserved. What was found in the tomb? And here the story will not be quite simple either. First out, what Schiaparelli found, what is in the Turin Museum, these are the remains of Queen Nefertari. Do not be surprised that they are so simple, because, for example, in the tomb of Tutankhamun, there is both a fantastic quality of the remains, made at the request of high-ranking courtiers, and in general, quite simple things with royal names. Here are such simple remains, covered with black resin and painted. The sandals of the queen, a column of jets with incrustations, various vessels for carrying the figure of the white ibis, and even such a fragment shows the level of plastic, animalistic, the level of monuments that once were in the tomb of the queen. In 1988, when the restoration of the tomb was underway, which I will say a little later, an amazing discovery was made. one of the restorers found a fragment of gold jewellery with the names of Queen Nefertari in the tomb, which the ancient thieves cleared, it would seem, completely. Yes, and after that there was also a worker of the Italian Nisa. Well, there in the Nisa, such a fragment of gold with the name of the Queen was found. Apparently, not all the gold was taken out of the tomb in antiquity, and absolutely not all the gold was taken from Caparelli. At the time of clearing the tomb, as practice shows, quite often local workers steal the most valuable items. And in front of you now, amazing fragments of gold jewellery from the tomb of Queen Nefertari, which the workers of the Nisa in 1904 brought to Luxor to the antiquarian Muhammad Muhasib. Muhammad Muhasib is a very interesting person. Those of you who are interested in the history of relations between Europe and Egypt of the 19th century know the name Lady Lucy Duff Gordon, the great British woman who founded one of the first hospitals in Luxor, who wrote in English the most fantastic, detailed and beautiful letters about the life of the Egyptians of that time. So Muhammad Muhasib was a boy who was a follower of her donkey. She taught him English, made him a human. As a result, he became very fond of English culture, became an antiquarian, and Muhammad Muhasib sold these things. He bought them in the Boston Museum. They are in Boston, in the Museum of Fine Arts. Here on the left is a fragment of a bracelet with the name of Nefertari. On the right, at the bottom, there's a part of the Queen's belt, and the Queen's belt is already worn out because the title is already worn out. And at the top, there is a suspension of lily flowers from a multi-layered necklace, probably from a series of necklaces that she once sent to the royal queen. Gold-plated copper. Another amazing item is a fragment of jewellery with the image of Anubis, gold-plated silver. Silver was very expensive, an expensive metal. In ancient Egypt, Muhammad Muhasib also sold all this through him in Boston. Quite often when they talk about the Queen Nefertari, they forget about these items because the emphasis immediately goes on the collection of the Turin Museum, and many do not know about the stolen things that went to Boston at the beginning of the 20th century. Well, and a few Ashepti, which are also sold in the Boston Museum, not of the same quality as those Ashepti that are kept in Turin. There's also an Ashepti of the Queen in a small regional Italian museum. That is, it is not a great rarity. And I really like this thing. I show it here in this part of the lecture, but we actually do not know whether it is from the tomb or not. This is a small vessel for rubbing, which the Queen Nefertari used. This is an amazing power of Egyptian archaeology, that we can now in the 21st century look at the thing that was already on the toilet table. The thing is made of ivory and rosewood. First, look down, it is open, and there are even fragments of this frozen aroma that the Queen once used. On the lid there are two cartridges with the names of Ramesses II and Nefertari. And then it is very interesting. The vessel itself is round. On the contour of the lid there are images of a solar disk. This is a complete cycle of rotation of the sun. This is what lies at the base of the Egyptian hieroglyphic sign Shen. But even more curious is the figure that stands on the lid. This is a hedgehog, my friends. In ancient times, from the 4th millennium BC, a hedgehog appears in the ritual practice of the Egyptians in what concerns the sun, because a hedgehog fights a snake. A hedgehog, a mongoose, these animals have always been sacred animals of Raharachta and Atuma. And here, in fact, the symbolic series is very interesting. This is a hedgehog that protects from the forces of chaos, the movement of the solar circle in its orbit, because the movement of the solar circle in its orbit is the principle of the cycle of immortality. That is, moving away from this jar, it takes a piece of immortality from the sun. Absolutely amazing. A very beautiful object that I would like you to remember. More things in Nefertari. It is also not clear whether they are from the tomb or not. This is the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum. This is a sun baby holding a pen by the mouth, and it is behind, signed by us, Nefertari. And what is below is a sodalic ring. Nefertari is very beautiful. Its name is guarded by a sacred falcon, and here is a flower of papyrus with buds, a tiny elegant thing. That is, this thing was once in the hands of the queen. This is a personal ring. It is amazing that all this has survived. We do not know where it came from. In the Metropolitan Museum, it is clear that in Turin, the main find is kept. This is the lid of a broken sarcophagus. The sarcophagus was broken. It is scary to get the royal body to such an extent that parts of the sarcophagus were even found in other tombs of the Tsars, and when Cristiano Leblagno found them, he was shocked. The decoration is simple, a rectangular plate with a winged image of the goddess protector and texts around the perimeter which were once filled with a blue-green colour of eternal life. And there are just prayers for the deceased. And this is probably the saddest frame of today's lecture. This is what has remained of the famous beauty. These are the knees of Queen Nefertari. They are kept in Turin. They were investigated by Egypt. If Egypt continues the DNA research, there are fragments of mummies of the daughters of Ramesses II. It can be confirmed, but I think there are no special doubts here. We are talking about a rather tall woman, about 1.66, 168 metres. For the Egyptians, this is quite high. She was a tall, sharp woman, judging by what we see now. And of course, it is immensely offensive that in ancient times such fate awaited the body of one of the most famous beauties. But if the mummy did not survive, and if the funerary offerings were ruined, then the tomb of the queen itself became a legend. It is included in all probably Christian publications on Egyptian art. And I immediately, looking at this portrait, I will make a very important correction. In many books, people who do not know, I do not even mention the internet, repeat one after another that the paintings from the tomb are not fertile. It is not a painting, it is a painted relief. And this is a great secret, because on the bad limestone of the Queen's Valley, a rough primer soil was laid. A piece is a sifted gypsum, and in the end, after the initial sketch, with additional overlays of the piece was made, volumes were made. And when you find the tomb, I will show you a lot of frames from the tomb. You will see that in fact this incredible vitality of the images of Nefertari, of the gods, the mystery of the tomb world that she comprehends in her tomb journey, it seems so alive because it's all voluminous. And in addition to the painting, this volume creates a feeling of such a living presence of these images. Let's look at what the tomb looks like. It is two-tiered, and there is a very interesting explanation for this because I will show it today. Here is the upper part to the central staircase that goes down. This is all that is connected with the zone of the arches, the zone of the horizons, where the sun rises and sets. These are solar deities. These are immortality. These are texts that say that Nefertari must become the sun, must, like the sunbeams, illuminate the secrets of the tomb world, and vice versa. The lower tier, where the burial chamber is located, is the duat, the place of praise, so the Egyptians called their tomb world. And there, if the sun reigns in the upper part, Osiris reigns in the lower part. And this is also a very important part of the concept of the Egyptian religion, which achieved its incredible rise and dawn under Ramesses the Great, when immortality was connected at the same time with the sun and with Osiris, and the subtle entity of the dead must unite with the sun, must go through all the mysteries of this solar transformation, and the body must become Osiris. And this is to become Osiris. This is not a beautiful phrase. The fact is that all the gods that are depicted in the tomb are Nefertari herself, who became these gods. Moreover, in the text of the tomb, from time to time, Nefertari gets the title of the male genus, because when she became Osiris, it was him. And it is very difficult for us to understand this to such an extent that some particularly talented people on the internet, trying unsuccessfully to translate the text from the tomb of Nefertari, say, oh, there are such mistakes of the Egyptian poet. They call Nefertari in the male genus. And this is not a mistake. This is just the fact of her transformation. She is Osiris. She unites with God, triumphantly victorious over death. And therefore, at this moment, the female genus leaves her. She goes through the state of Osiris, and when she comes out victorious, she is again a blinding woman. That is, here the gender changes depending on who she becomes in another world. Let's take a walk through the tomb. And this is the first frame. It is from the archival apparel. This is the entrance to the tomb. Here is the solar disc, and just maybe not very clearly visible, but here is the solar disc of the horizon, two eyes of the choir, two figures of the damaged goddess. But the entrance itself is already the horizon. This is the sun that goes down there as usual beyond the horizon. The sun goes to the west in order to in turn go through the transformation and gain strength for the victorious phenomenon on the eastern horizon. Every centimetre is a voluminous painted relief. And this is, of course, an inimitable, great masterpiece. I will tell you honestly, there will be amazing photos now, but this is nothing compared to the original. You need to watch the original. In the same way, I will tell you that none of the well-known 3D reconstructions is even close to what you can see with your own eyes in the Valley of Kings. Let's see separate scenes. Nefertari enters the afterlife. All these illustrations are vignettes to the chapters of the Book of the Dead. If in the Valley of Kings for the pharaohs were made universal books that told about the universal processes of the regeneration of the world, then for the Queen, the Book of the Dead. But nevertheless, there is a difference in status. In the tombs of the royal children, the king himself always appears, who represents the child to the gods. In the tomb of Nefertari, there's not a single image, not even a mention of the great Ramses. She is an independent person here. She is the person who can find immortality and unite with the eternal God, which I will show you now. So, the illustrations begin. Chapter 17 of the Book of the Dead. Here's a large block of text. Nefertari in a canopy, which was usually built, this is a sack nature, a divine canopy, which was usually built over the tomb. She plays in Senate. She plays with fate, which she does not see, the right to enter another world. And here is her bat, her active vital force in the form of a bird with her head stands on the first portal. This is the entrance to the tomb world. And here Nefertari herself leans on her knees, holding her hands in the pose of adoration before various deities, who are the rulers of the West, the rulers of the tomb world, from the decisions of which her future fate depends. Here she stands in front of the sign of the horizon, the sign of a Heth, two hills between which the sun and two lions, Ruti, Shu and Tifnut, the great forces, guard the passage of the tomb world. The task of this entire iconographic program is not just to create beauty. The task is magical. The task is to ensure Nefertari's immortality. Therefore, here in the right part of this frame, again the nature workshop, the divine canopy, and there Nefertari with a beard and a green face lies on the burial bed, and the goddess Esida and Neftida. Esida on the right, Neftida on the left. She is weeping as Esida and Neftida in the image of the falcon were weeping for Osiris. She became Osiris. In the centre is the great Ben, the incarnation of the planet Venus, which at the same time was considered both the soul of Osiris and the soul of the sun. That is this union of the sun and Osiris, infinity and eternity in Egyptian words, yesterday and tomorrow. This is a direct quote. This is the beginning of this journey and program. During the journey through the tomb, a plan will appear so that you understand where we are now. We are now looking at the left side of the upper tier. From this tier, we will lower the further rooms. There is a descent down there to the duat, to the burial chamber. And in fact, the tomb, as Christian de Roche-Noblecourt, it has all this iconographic program of the Book of the Dead, not by chance. The chapters are chosen, and the chapters are chosen so that on one wall Nefertari goes down to the dungeon to become Osiris, and then when she became Osiris and triumphed over death, she comes out on the other wall. That is for her. This is a machine, a giant, calm machine of transformation associated with the transition to the state of the spirit of A. It is curious that now you see red rectangles, 2 columns are highlighted, inscriptions which are near the entrance. Here she is still alive, earthly woman. She is just here, the hereditary nobility, great praise of Osiris, the great wife of the Tsar, and so on. This heredity is purely the title of a living woman. We have now remembered this detail. We need it. Here is such a descent down, absolutely cosmic. This is the starry sky. In the centre, above the entrance to the burial chamber, there is a huge figure of the goddess Mat, who spread her wings, and there are the words said Mat, the daughter of the sun, protection over the son of the wife of the Tsar's great Nefertari. She is already a son here because this is Osiris, because this is a transformation of her state. The descent itself is very clearly divided into 2 parts. The upper triangular components correspond to the level of the upper chambers, and here is the sun world and the sun goddess, and the lower ones correspond to the descent to the burial chamber, and there are the deceased goddesses and Anubis who meets her. And so if I would like to highlight important things in the black insert, such a cut of the wall, you see how the red line divides it. Everything at the top corresponds to the level of the upper tier, and there is the sun, and everything below is a meeting with the afterlife. This is the transition from the state of Ahed to the state of Duat. Finally, I am not only interested in the inscription framed in green where Nefertari became a sun, but I am also interested in the turquoise pillars. A few more steps back, she was a hereditary nobility, and here there are no more winter tiles at all. Everything is Osiris, already completely changed, and they meet her as a creature of another nature, if you can say so. Let's look at the images on the walls. It's amazing, absolutely beautiful. At the entrance, the goddess is a protector. Here, in this case, The figure of Neith promises her well-being, and Nefertari herself brings vessels to different deities. Here's the first goddess in a green, such a luxurious dress. This is Kador, the ruler of Pivenskoye. Everything is signed. All this volume, not all frames show it, but we have to imagine it. And then other goddesses follow Kador like this. Kador, Selkit, and the concluding Mahat, with an ostrich feather. The mat will appear on both walls, because the great two mats, the hall of two truths, will be the court hall for Nefertari. Finally, pay attention to one more very interesting thing. The mat with its wings keeps the name of Nefertari. And in addition to the name of Nefertari, there's also a sign of Shen, the sign of infinity. That is the mat itself, from which the verdict of the condemned court depends, is already here, and with this magical message, the keeper of the name of Nefertari. And finally, this triangle, which I specially lay out here. The corridor is very narrow. In both cases, it ends with the sign of the snake, which also keeps the name of the queen. The opposite wall, it is here under its favourite high crown. And here, accordingly, other goddesses. Here is Isida, the great mother of God, the ruler of the sky. Here is Neptide. And again, as we agreed, the second mat, which protects the name of the queen with its wings. This is what the snake looks like, which ends this fragment of the decoration. And look, on the body of the snake, the sign of infinity is worn, and the infinity itself in the form of such a separate sign between the wings of this snake. The name of the queen in the cartouche is filled with yellow, the yellow colour of immortality. There the cartouche stands on the sign of Tigris, from which gold flows. This symbol of gold is a symbolic sign of immortality. And on top of it is the sun, a sign that it has become the sun. And of course, an incredibly amazing program. The lower part of Anubis is on a pedestal on both sides. And on one wall is Neptide, on the other wall is Isida. The texts that accompany the image of Anubis are written apparently specifically for the tomb. They are not included in the Book of the Dead. The words spoken by Anubis and Mute, the great god residing in the Holy Land. I go before you, O great royal wife, mistress of both lands, ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, Osiris Nefertari, beloved Mut, righteous for Osiris, the great god, residing in the west. I go before you, and I gave you a place in the Holy Land, so that you may appear triumphant in the heavens, like your father Ra. Put the diadem over your head. Isida and Neptide rewarded you and created your beauty, like your father, so that you may appear triumphant in the heavens, like Ra, so that you may illuminate the world behind the tomb with your rays. The great son of the gods gave you a place on earth. Well, your mother greets you like she greets Ra. Let the souls of Pe and Buta rejoice, like they rejoiced in your father residing in the west. Come to your mother and sit on the throne of Osiris, and the rulers of the Holy Land will accept you, and your heart will rejoice forever. I can't help but show you what this looks like. This is incredibly beautiful. But there is a very interesting thing here. The fact is that near each pillar it is written that this is also Nefertari. And we have a jet pillar. This is a symbol of Osiris, a symbol of his spine, his body. He often has anthropomorphic, he has eyes. That is, this is the embodiment of Osiris. And then think about it. This is absolutely incredible Egyptian flying space. Nefertari is the pillar of its own universe, in the centre of which it lies, like Osiris. Then you can talk for a long time about all sorts of theological explanations, but I'm telling you this thing so that you understand how deep it is, that this is not just beautiful visual art, but I can't do without visual art either, so be patient a little. I'll show you some close-ups. It's incredible. This is the true colour of the 13th century until the new era. After the Restoration, there are neither inscriptions nor recordings, and these are all volumes. In the golden nausea, filled with golden light, stands Osiris, and he is not just the Lord of the afterlife. He is here on Nefer. Osiris on Nefer is Osiris who won death, and it should correspond with him, because in the centre of the burial chamber, between these two pillars, once stood the same sarcophagus, the broken lid of which you saw. Look at the colours. These are mineral paints. They are not threatened by anything but moisture. And of course, looking at this frame, remember the frames of the tombs of other queens, princesses, which I showed you. Here's another frame. Here's the Kadkor Fivanskaya, the poor side chambers. It is clear that the modern wooden floor, but absolutely incredible. Look at the Nefertari Snubis, and here's Jet, and it's written right next to this pillar Jet, that this is Osiris Nefertari, and so on. That is, she takes the most different forms here, which should lead her to the comprehension of the source of eternal life. Nefertari is Kadkor Imantid, the mother of all Westerns. There's another very interesting thing, which I will probably mark here. In all the images, except for one, and this is important, Nefertari has the colour of the face of an earthly woman. She is so pinkish reddish, and the goddesses are immaculately golden. Her task is to become the same immaculate golden goddess. And judging by the fact that there is her tomb, she did it. How exactly? I'll show you in a few minutes. And around the perimeter of the burial chamber, there are also vignettes to various chapters of the Book of the Dead, which tell about the 7 gates of the other world. 5 are depicted near each gate: the angry keeper, the spirit, and the so-called preacher, who talks to the dead when he approaches these gates. And you see here, everywhere, on the one hand, Nefertari stands in front of her is the gate. Nefertari is the gate. Everything that fits 5 gates, they're depicted here. Here's an example for you, right here. Here's the fantasy. I really like the central keeper in the form of a lioness with a green face, which raises 2 snakes from the ears. They all have names, and accordingly, according to the rules of the Book of the Dead, the deceased must know the name of the gate, the name of the keeper, the name of the preacher, and after that, she has the right to pass through these doors. And here's another scene. All this we walk with you on the burial chamber. It is very clear that all this volume, and I am now interested in the figure that we see in the green rectangle. This is Nefertari, who has finally gained the golden skin colour and lost the ornaments of the earthly queen. But at the same time, she has 2 signs of life in her hands. The earthly life is eternal, and next to her is her grandson, her name, and she waves her right hand in front of Osiris. Osiris, according to the legend, when he was killed and regained eternal life, he passed through the burial court, and he first got the right to judge only because he himself had once passed through the court and was justified. That is why here is the only image of Nefertari without the parade clothes, without an ornament on his head, without a favourite crown with high feathers, but with a golden colour of the face of the goddess, and with life in both hands. The most varied spirits. This flaming baby with fire knives is very good in itself. Here, the texts on this wall are more preserved, and a very important scene on one of the walls. Here is Nefertari on the right with the sacrifices, and here are the main rulers of the West who judge Nefertari, and on the other hand, they are her beloved heavenly parents. These are Osiris V, the great god of the West, the Western Hathor, and Anubis, who here in the tomb acts as the ruler of the whole ritual of transformation and liberation of Nefertari's soul from the earthly body. In the side's small chambers, unfortunately, they are badly damaged. The chamber that ends in the tomb itself, there is practically nothing on the walls. Very strong damage. Various reconstructions were proposed, but they are far from perfect. Rather, it does not reflect the author's imagination than some kind of reality. What is left in the side chambers is the legendary sarcophagus of Osiris, from which his head rises, and this Osiris is also Nefertari. These are the bearers of life, spirits, and the gods keepers of the sacred world. Here is Nephthys, Hephaestus, and Siphoxenub, the keeper of the bowls, the keeper of the box for the insides. Here is such a wonderful Nefertari worshipped by the heavenly cows, and the image of her mummy, very rare for Egyptian art, in one of the side chambers. Here she is, the mummy of Osiris, the great wife of the Tsar, the ruler of both lands. Another large figure of the goddess, Nut, because Nut, like the mother of Osiris, spreads her wings over all the dead, protecting them as she once protected Osiris. We rise from the funeral level back to the head. That is, the mystery of Nefertari is over. She became Osiris. And then, as the ancient Egyptian texts say, in the middle of the night, Osiris unites with the sun. The sun, the body of Osiris, gives the opportunity to renew itself and reappear on the horizon, and in turn the sun Osiris, uniting with it a single deity, gives the opportunity of immortality. This united Osiris of the sun is the eternal God, and through him Nefertari goes to find immortality. In the upper tier, which is part of the zone of Aheth, there is an amazing image in this room, a great classic. On both sides we'll look at the image. The gods bring Nefertari to the gods of the solar world. On the left, the deity with the head of the scorpion is Hipri, the god of the morning sun, the god of dawn. On the other side, the sun in triumph is Racharashta with the head of the falcon, and sitting behind him is his daughter, and at the same time, mother, the feminine beginning, Hathor and Mented. When Nefertari comes here, she sees another amazing figure of the neck above the passage. This is the goddess Nehbet, the goddess of Upper Egypt, the great forefather mother, which Nefertari, going here, draws again two signs of infinity in his paws. This is just a legend. This is a classic, immortal, great, and despite the fact that it is in all books, you can look at it forever. The great Asida, who leads his daughter Nefertari to Hepri, to the rise of the sun, and due to the fact that the scene is about the sunrise, on the head of the goddess itself flames the solar disk between the horns of the cow. The removal of the goddess Hathor, the sun goddess, with whom Asida is often identified. In the hands of Asida, you have the scepter of the supreme power of the gods, and behind Nefertari's back is the same pillar of jets with the scepters in which she had just been in the burial chamber. She is from the state of the sun, parallel scene on the other hand. Here the core of the son of Asida leads Nefertari. In my opinion, this is one of the most beautiful images of the queen in her tomb, and again behind her jets, the state from which she left. And inside the opening again, the goddess of protection. We were lucky again on Nebet, who invite Nefertari to this world of the sun, and say that she will be an immortal spirit. The central part of this chamber of the upper level in which we passed is Atum, the god of the evening sun, and Osiris. These are the two halves of the god that should unite. Each of them, Nefertari, brings magnificent offerings. And if you look closely, we'll see it now, in the crown of Osiris there is already a solar disk, and the flowers in which his huge crown of Atep is painted are the flowers of the Nile, as a sign that the waters of the river will come again, the world will be renewed, death will perish, and life will be immortal. Several scenes from this chamber. I think you perfectly understand how we go through its walls. The basis of any immortality and any comprehension of the true meanings is knowledge. That's why here Nefertari sits in front of the god Thoth, the god of wisdom. In front of her is a cup of water, a palette of a poet, a frog which symbolises immortality, and a fragment from the Book of the Dead. Here is the Great One who sees her father, the commander of the letter of Thoth. Here I come with a soul powerful, knowing the writing of Thoth. Bring me a vessel, bring me a palette of Thoth with their secrets in them. O gods, here I am a poet. Bring me the properties for the letter so that I may embody the orders of Osiris, the great god, perfectly every day. I will follow the truth. I will comprehend the truth. This is a necessary mention of the sacred knowledge, of the Queen's involvement in the secret and true meanings of the world of gods. Another very important scene for transformation is the great god Ptah, the lord of the secrets of the earth. His face is green. He stands on a hieroglyph which on the one hand shows the spring of eternal waters, and on the other hand this sign beveled in front conveys one of the hieroglyphs of the goddess of truth, the goddess Mat, and Jet follows him. She brings him woven fabrics, such woven wicks which are associated with the ancient ritual of wrapping in light, because the feathers of a mummy are in fact streams of light that restore the integrity of the body of Osiris according to the text of the pyramids. All this has a huge context. Here is a fragment illustrating the 148th verse of the Book of the Dead. A bull and 7 cows, which will provide food for the Queen Nefertari in the other world. This is about fat and thin cows in later religious texts, and 4 oars, which will provide, according to the text of the Book of the Dead, invisibility from enemies. At the same time, she will be able to row with these oars when she becomes a comb of the sun and his companion. And here, worshipping the cows, another fantastic Nefertari, which I chose today as an official image. Everything is absolutely beautiful here. The colours, proportions, crown of Shuti, the trim of the mane is red, and next to what she was going to is the end of the road. Isida and Neftida hold the deity whose body Osiris embalmed, and the head in the form of a green oven. Oven is the night form of the sun, the green colour of immortality. Next to it is written Osiris, resting in Ra. Further Ra, this resting in Osiris. Here it is, the pre-eternal deity. And this is Nefertari herself, who, united with the source of all life, poured immortality and came to the light of the day. Unfortunately, this amazing legend, this incredible masterpiece, it was quite recently, at the beginning of the 20th century, was different. This is a modern frame. This is how this scene looked in 1904. Look, the whole lower part is collapsed. The fact is that moisture is released from our breathing when we come to the tomb. Moisture reacts with salt, which is found in the limestone in which the tomb is excavated. Salt crystals simply grow before our eyes. They repel the paint layer, and the tomb is crumbled. In the archive of the Goethe Institute, there are such frames. The same Bochatum, 4/20/86, 92, that is, in 1904 it was completely intact. In 1920 the collapse began. In 1986, in fact, it had already collapsed. It was simply redrawn. And in 1992, at the time of the famous restoration project of the Goethe Institute, the tomb of Nefertari, they removed all the redrawing and left only what is authentic. This is the rule of restoration. This is only 1904. It's scary to think about it. As a result, a large number of tombs were severely damaged. However, in the 80s, by the 20th century, the Service of Antiquity of Egypt turned to the international community with official words that Nefertari was dying, despite the fact that it had been open since the 50s only for visits. It was still enough for the tomb to lose its fragments. As a result, 7 years of research, 5 years of direct restoration work, and in 1995, after the titanic work of the Goethe Institute, Nefertari was opened. It was closed, realizing that it would collapse anyway. It was closed for very expensive tickets. It was closed only for VIP groups. Fortunately for many, unfortunately for the tomb. After the Egyptian Revolution, Nefertari is open to everyone for an expensive but affordable ticket. This is an attempt to attract tourists to the country. With each of them, a new crystal of salt grows in the entranced tomb. This is such a terrible fate. Here are some shots from the restoration of the Goethe Institute. See how it works? These are all very small rooms. Here's an image of the goddess Isida, whose cracks are glued with special Japanese paper. Thin cotton production was also used. Look, there is a modern finish on the wigs of Isida. Do you see the blue colour of a completely different shade of this pigment? These are all the things that the Goethe took out and simply covered with a 1-ton layer of sand colour in order to leave only the original. The degree of preservation of the pigment is so great that it would be absolutely wrong to complement it with any modern pigment. You need to see what is left of the lower tier. Here's the work in the burial chamber. I urge everyone to look on the internet. You can see all the publications of the Goethe Institute on the restoration of the PDF. On their website, you'll see everything in detail there. But it would be unfair for me to show this picture. This is the great Alessia d'Alessandro, a famous Italian from Milan, an outstanding restorer for whom Nefertari became one of the high points of her achievement. This picture was once called To Nefertari. This is really an amazing work, an amazing beauty of two women, ancient and modern, and a very worthy attempt of modern humanity to save the incredible baggage that came to us from the ancient world. And yet, concluding my story for today, I do not want to finish the tomb, because in relation, as it seems to me, to one of the most famous beauties of women of antiquity, it would be simply unfair. Now the text will sound, which never sounded in Russian. This is the famous hymn to the face of Queen Nefertari, which accompanies one of her images in the Luxor temple, where she's young, dazzling, with her sisters in her arms. This is how you see her here now. She is of hereditary nobility, lady of great praise, lady of mercy, sweet love, lady of both lands, the land of papyrus and the land of lilies. Look at her. Her hands are clean, the sisters shake. For the pleasure of God, her father Amen. How beautiful is her movement. Her hair is wavy, the singer of excellent talent. Beauty performed in a crown with 2 feathers, the first of the women of the royal house. For the choir of the Lord of the palace. Pleasure in the movement of her lips. Everything she says is done for her, performed for the good of her heart. Her words are pleasant to all living on earth. They live in order to hear her voice.